Hello there, and welcome to The Roast. My name is Alex, and you are on the Classic Cars Roast channel. People ask me all the time if they should buy one of these. After this video, you'll have your answer, and you probably won't like it. 1970 Plymouth Duster 340. Look, if you think you're diving into a muscle car paradise with this one, hold your horses. Yes, it has the Duster badge, but let's be honest, it's part of the malaise-era, and that alone should send shivers down your spine. The Duster 340 might look like it can throw down, but it's a far cry from the glory days of high-compression V8s. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to hear that this car only cranks out a pathetic 190 horsepower SAE net. Seriously? That's like bringing a rubber knife to a gunfight. Now, talking about the market, the Duster 340 is experiencing a bizarre uptick in pricing. I mean, pristine, numbers-matching examples can fetch up to $60,000 at auction. How absurd is that? A car that used to be a dime a dozen is now treated like gold, all because of its so-called brutal charm. Let's not kid ourselves. This is more about nostalgia than actual performance. With its lightweight construction, sure, it was nimble compared to its heavier counterparts, but the handling is far from spectacular. Cars from the mid-60s to early 70s handled much, much better, and that's a fact. And don't even get me started on availability. You'd think finding a good Duster would be easy, right? Wrong. The decent ones are rarer than a unicorn at a car show, and the ones that are left often have rust spots that would make a junkyard blush. Lower rear quarters, trunk floors, you name it. Plus, the electrical gremlins in these aging beasts can turn your joyride into a roadside disaster. First impressions? Well, those dual hood scoops scream, "I'm fast." But in reality, they're just there to hide the fact that the engine is a letdown. The interior? A basic vinyl bench seat that looks about as inviting as a dentist's waiting room. And of course, no tachometer standard, because who needs to know how fast they're actually going when you're driving a glorified grocery getter? So here's the deal. If you're in the market for a classic muscle car that's actually going to deliver, you might want to steer clear of this one. But if you've got a soft spot for cars that used to be loved and thrown away, then maybe, just maybe, this could be your jam. But remember, it's only original once, and that counts for a lot in this game. Now, let's dive into the creation story of the 1970 Plymouth Duster 340, a vehicle that embodies the brutal charm of an era teetering on the brink of automotive mediocrity, the malaise-era. When you think of muscle cars, you picture raw power and unapologetic performance, and the Duster, with its fastback design and that aggressive stance, certainly had the potential. But here's where reality starts to bite. It was produced at a time when the automotive industry was beginning to choke on emissions regulations and fuel crises, leading to a rapid decline in performance. 1970 was the last great year for high-compression V8s, and the Duster was supposed to be a crown jewel in that fading legacy. But did it deliver? Let's break it down. Under the hood, the Duster 340 boasted a 340 cubic inch displacement engine. Sounds impressive, right? Well, hold your applause. The gross horsepower was rated at a mere 275. That's right, 275 horsepower at a time when competitors were still churning out real numbers. By the time you fast forward to the malaise years, that pathetic horsepower would dwindle down to laughable figures, leaving enthusiasts scratching their heads. The torque, at 340 pound-feet, was decent, but the power delivery left much to be desired. You could feel the weight of the malaise-era creeping in with every turn of the key. And let's not forget about the transmission. While the Duster 340 had the option of the Torque Flight 727 3-speed automatic, it was a desperate attempt to cling to the glory days of performance. The Turbo-Hydromatic 400 is the undisputed king of automatic transmissions, period. It's a shame the Duster didn't come with it, as that would have made a world of difference in how it performed on the road. Production quirks also reared their ugly heads. With rust creeping into lower rear quarters and trunk floors, the Duster became a victim of its own design. And those comically thick door seals? They were a sad attempt to cover up poor panel gaps. The interior offered a minimalistic design with basic bench seats and a dashboard layout that screamed, "I was cheap to produce." You could choose vinyl bucket seats, but who even needed that when the engine was already underwhelming? But here's the kicker. This car has somehow become a sought-after classic, fetching auction prices up to $60,000 for pristine examples. It's a brutal reminder of just how far we've come and how quickly we forget the mediocrity that once ruled the roads. So, what do you think? Does the Duster 340 deserve its place in history, or is it just another relic from a time when cars were losing their soul? All right, folks, it's time to dissect the exterior of the 1970 Plymouth Duster 340, and boy, do we have a lot to unpack. First off, let's acknowledge that the Duster came in some truly eye-popping factory colors. I mean, we're talking about shades like Rally Red, Limelight, Vitamin C Orange, and Sassy Grass Green. These colors scream for attention, but here's the kicker. If you find one that's been repainted in some drab hue, for me, that's an immediate no. Game over. Originality is everything in the classic car world, and it's only original once. Now, let's get into the body lines. The fastback design of the Duster is a fascinating mix of sporty and practical, but it also hints at the compromises made during the malaise-era. The dual hood scoops on the 340 trim are a nice touch, giving it that performance edge, but don't let those trick you into thinking it's a powerhouse. We're still dealing with a pretty dreadful horsepower number, and that's a shame for a muscle car. Moving on to the grille, this car features a divided grille with black vertical lines, which is a neat design from 1970, but come on, it's hardly revolutionary. It's not the aggressive, bold front end that you'll find on some of its contemporaries. And those chrome bumpers? Typical for the era, but let's be honest, they do little to enhance the car's overall appeal when they're just as likely to rust away as those lower rear quarters. Speaking of rust, those common spots, lower rear quarters, trunk floor, and inner fenders, are where you'll want to keep your eyes peeled. If you spot bubbling paint or worse, run. The Duster might have been a popular choice back in the day, but that doesn't mean it's immune to the ravages of time. Now let's talk about those comically thick door seals meant to hide poor panel gaps. Seriously, who thought that was a good idea? It's like slapping a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. You want a classic that feels solid and well-built, not like it's about to fall apart at any moment. In summary, while the exterior of the 1970 Plymouth Duster 340 has its moments, like those vibrant colors and unique body lines, it's hard to overlook the flaws. You'll need to be picky if you want one that doesn't look like it's been through a war zone. So, what's your take? Is the exterior enough to make you want to dive in? Or are you seeing the cracks in the armor? Now turn your attention to the interior of the 1970 Plymouth Duster 340. This space is where the charm of the car meets the reality of its age, and let me tell you, it's a mixed bag. First up, the dashboard. What a sight. You've got this simple, minimalistic layout featuring two large round gauges for speed and fuel. It's basic, no frills, and honestly, pretty dreary when you think about the vibrant exterior colors like Vitamin C Orange and Sassy Grass Green. There's no tachometer in standard form, which is a serious oversight for a car boasting performance. You'd think they'd at least consider a rally instrument cluster as standard equipment, but nope. The smell? Ah yes, the smell. It's that unmistakable aroma of aging vinyl mixed with a hint of gasoline and decades of nostalgia that hits you like a freight train when you open the door. But don't get too comfortable. The seats are basic bench seats, hardly luxurious. The optional vinyl bucket seats in the Duster 340 are a step up, but they're still not exactly designed for long-distance cruising. If you want to feel like a king while driving, you'd be better off looking elsewhere. The steering wheel options don't do much to help either. A standard 2-spoke wheel that feels about as exciting as a wet mop, or an optional 3-spoke simulated wood wheel that's more style than substance. Now let's talk about the console. You could opt for a floor-mounted console in the Duster 340, but honestly it's like putting lipstick on a pig. Sure, it might add a touch of sportiness, but it doesn't fix the underlying issues. The build quality is pretty dreadful, with comically thick door seals trying to mask the poor panel gaps that are all too common in these old beasts. And if you think about electrical issues, the aging wiring harness is just waiting to give you a headache down the line. For me, this shabby interior is a significant disqualifying element. You can dress it up all you want, but when you're sitting in a car that feels like it's been through the ringer, it's hard to overlook. So, would I buy a Duster 340 based on its interior? Absolutely not. If you're going to invest your hard-earned cash, you deserve something that doesn't make you feel like you're revisiting a neglected chapter of automotive history. The engine is where the real problems begin with the 1970 Plymouth Duster 340. Sure, it boasts a 340 cubic inch displacement, but let's not kid ourselves. In the grand scheme of things, that's just a number. The horsepower? A pathetic 275 gross horsepower, which is actually impressive for its time, but leaves us wanting when you consider that the horsepower figures were inflated before the net ratings came into play. After 1970, the manufacturers began to publicize net horsepower, and that's when you see the reality of the malaise-era. The lack of compression in later models became a joke. They were scraping the bottom of the barrel with a 7.6 to 1 compression ratio. If you think about it, that's barely enough to get your attention, let alone put a smile on your face as you drive. Now, the torque is where it gets interesting. The Duster 340 churns out a respectable 340 pound-feet of torque, and that's something to write home about. It means that when you stomp on the gas, you actually feel a push in your back, unlike some of the sad sacks of the later malaise cars that couldn't pull themselves out of a wet paper bag. But let's be real. This engine is still a product of its era, and that means compromises were made. The carburetor tuning was often out of spec, and if you weren't careful, you could end up with a car that barely ran right, which is just embarrassing for a performance vehicle. And then there's the question of reliability. The rear differential can wear out quicker than you can say poor maintenance, especially in a car that's being pushed hard. If you're contemplating taking one of these beasts for a spin, make sure you've got a mechanic on speed dial. What about the sound? The engine note is like a choir of angels if those angels had a hooligan streak. It's raw, it's aggressive, and it's a reminder of the power that once was. But before you get too excited, remember that the Duster's reputation for performance is built on the past. So, where does that leave us? The engine is a double-edged sword. It gives you a taste of the muscle car glory days, but it also reminds you of how far we've fallen into the malaise era. Would I buy one? If it's original and in good condition, maybe. But if it's been messed with or has a repainted body, that's an immediate no for me. What do you think? All right, folks, buckle up because we're about to dive deep into the mechanics of the 1970 Plymouth Duster 340, and trust me, this is where the rubber meets the road, quite literally. First off, we have to talk about the transmission because, in the world of muscle cars, this is a sacred cow. The Duster 340 came equipped with the legendary Torque Flight 727 3-speed automatic transmission. This isn't just any old slush box. This is the best automatic transmission ever built. Period. It's robust, it's dependable, and it handles power like a champ. If you've ever had the misfortune of driving a Ford C6 or, heaven forbid, a THM 200, you know exactly why I'm raving about this unit. The Torque Flight is smooth, it shifts crisply, and it's got the muscle to back up the Duster's performance. The only thing better than this transmission is having it in a car that isn't a total rust bucket. Now, let's turn our attention to the rear axle. The Duster 340 came with choices, 3.23 to 1 as standard, or you could opt for the performance 3.55 ratio. What's the difference? Well, the 3.55 gives you that extra kick off the line, but it can also make highway cruising a bit of a nightmare, turning those revs into a cacophony of engine noise. But hey, this is a muscle car. You're not buying it for the serenity of the open road, right? You want the thrill, the excitement, and that raw, unfiltered power. But here's where things get tricky. The rear differential can be a weak point if it hasn't been properly maintained. With the Duster's high-performance applications, you need to baby that rear end, or it'll bite you when you least expect it. And let's not forget about the carburetor tuning. If that's out of spec, good luck getting any respectable performance out of this beast. So, what's the takeaway here? If you're considering a Duster 340, check the transmission and the rear axle like your life depends on it. Now, would I buy a Duster 340 based on its mechanics alone? Absolutely, if it's been taken care of. But if it's got a questionable transmission or a shot rear end, I'd rather walk. These elements are critical. After all, who wants to throw money down the drain on a car that's falling apart underneath? The most unforgivable aspect of the 1970 Plymouth Duster 340 has to be its suspension, brakes, and handling feel. If you think you're going to be carving corners like a hot knife through butter, you're in for a rude awakening. It's almost laughable how this car was designed to perform, especially when you consider the glory days of muscle cars. Back in the mid-60s to early 70s, American cars had the handling finesse of a ballerina. Now, this is more like a lumbering ox on ice. First off, let's talk about that suspension. Sure, it has a live rear axle, which is fine for straight-line acceleration, but when it comes to anything resembling a corner, you better hold on tight. The rear leaf springs are about as sophisticated as a rock, and you can practically feel every bump in the road rattling your teeth. You'd think the engineers would have put a little more thought into the ride quality. Instead, what you get is a suspension setup that feels like it belongs on a farm truck, not a muscle car. Now turn your attention to the brakes, or lack thereof. The Duster 340 came with drum brakes on all four corners, which is about as outdated as flip phones in today's world. Drum brakes are notorious for fading under hard use, and that's exactly what you'll experience when you attempt to stop from high speeds. The pedal feel is vague at best, and if you plan on pushing this car to its limits, good luck. You'll find yourself praying for dear life as you approach a corner, wishing you had better stopping power. And let's dive into the handling feel. You might think you're behind the wheel of a muscle car, but the reality is that you're wrestling with an unrefined beast. The steering is vague and lacks feedback, making it feel like you're steering a boat rather than a car. It's almost comical to think that this was considered acceptable back in the day. You'd expect some level of precision, but instead, you're left with a vague notion of where the front wheels are pointing. To sum it all up, if you're looking for a classic that can handle like a dream, the Duster 340 is a hard pass for me. The suspension is a joke, the brakes are downright dangerous, and the handling is more like an awkward dance than exhilarating driving. For my money, I'd rather have a car that makes me feel alive on the road, not one that makes me question my sanity. So, if you're considering diving into the world of the Duster 340, just remember, it's a one-way ticket to a bumpy ride you won't soon forget, and not in a good way. When it comes to reliability, the Plymouth Duster 340 has a reputation that can only be described as a mixed bag. Sure, it's got that classic muscle car charm, but let's not kid ourselves. This is a vehicle born from the malaise-era. And with that comes a host of issues that can turn your dream ride into a repair nightmare. Common rust spots are the first red flag. You're looking at lower rear quarters, trunk floors, and inner fenders that are practically begging for a rust inspection before you even consider buying one. If the body isn't rust-free, you might as well wave goodbye to your investment because a repainted body is an immediate no for me. Game over. Now let's talk about the electrical system. With aging wiring harnesses, shorts and failures are as inevitable as a bad hair day. And if you think you're going to get away without a carburetor tune-up, think again. These things often come out of spec, leaving you with a car that feels more sluggish than a turtle on a Sunday stroll. It's just pathetic. As for performance, while the Duster can hit 60 miles per hour in about 6 seconds, that's not exactly setting the world on fire compared to modern standards. The quarter-mile time of 14.7 seconds is impressive for its day, but it's like comparing a dinosaur to a sleek modern sports car. There's simply no contest. So, what's the verdict? If you find a Duster 340 that's been well maintained, with a solid body and all the original parts intact, you might be looking at a piece of automotive history that's worth considering. Prices can hit upwards of $40,000 to $60,000 for pristine examples. And let me tell you, those numbers are as absurd as they are real. The brutal charm of this car has caught the attention of collectors, pushing values up for these once-ignored machines. In conclusion, if you're in the market for a classic muscle car that offers a bit of character and a lot of nostalgia, the Plymouth Duster 340 might just fit the bill, provided you're prepared for the quirks and flaws that come with it. It's only original once, and if you find one in good condition for a good price, buy it. But remember, if you're expecting a perfect ride, you might want to rethink your options. Would you spend your money on this? If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and give it a like. Leave your comments and impressions. Your opinion is very important to me. Until next time.